Hi, and welcome to A Victorious Life, an outreach teaching ministry of the Shiloh Holiness Church located at 2419 North Glass Street in the beautiful city of Roses, Tyler, Texas. I'm your host, Lori STIMPSON-ARTEAGA, and as always, we want to say thank you for allowing us to come into your homes by way of VPN broadcasting, YouTube, and the website. We are excited about what the Lord is doing. This is the second month of this new year, and we hope that you are staying the course. We hope whatever goals or plans you have purposefully set up and set out to accomplish for 2016, we hope that you are staying the course with those. We also want to let you know that we are still teaching the Bible study at 411 West Front Street from 6 to 7 p.m. And for the month of January, we worked with the book of Genesis, excuse me, and now we are in the book of Exodus. So we ask that you will come out during the week. Again, Tuesday nights, 411 West Front Street at the Lighthouse location. And we'll teach from, again, 6 to 7 p.m. We teach, it's a high-tech environment, so a lot of it is, the majority of it is on a power, we're utilizing technology. So we do have a handout that goes out at the end of each, actually before each session, with some take-home study question, reading assignments, and so the notes are given out after each session, and then there's some challenge questions that we can apply to our lives. So we're in the book of Exodus, and we are running some of the things that we say here on television. We are not, when you come to Bible study, I guess it's like with anything, Bible study is more intensive and more extensive. So some of the things, some people, they said, well, I don't have to come out because you're teaching it on television. Well, you're only getting, even during this, with this hour session, you're only getting a snippet of the overall less study. Because again, we give handouts. There are different videos, snippets of videos that we're able to show because of modern technology. So we do want to encourage you to come out and attend the Bible study. For any of the lessons, the television lessons that you missed, please feel free to check out the YouTube channel or go to the website that appears at the bottom of your screen, and there's a link to the videos. The newsletters the online newsletter is uploaded for January and February. March will be the March and April newsletter will be uploaded the first week of March. We also pass out at the Bible study devotionals, free devotionals, for free monthly devotionals. Now, I'm not writing those, but they are free of charge. So again, this upcoming Tuesday night, 411 West Front, 6 to 7 p.m., we will be taking a look at Exodus chapter 4, mainly Exodus chapter 4. So to be on the up and up, or to not get behind, we encourage you to read chapter 3. Now I'm trying to think, Mr. Cameron, if we have any new announcements, and there's really nothing going on for the remainder of this month. I have some upcoming engagements for March, but I guess that's irrelevant to the calendar. Exodus chapter 2, we're going to pick up at verses 9 and 10. Actually, we're going to go ahead and skip down to number 11 if that's okay with the creative director. Okay, because on last week we talked about Moses, okay? And Moses has been weaned, per se, from his biological mother, and he has lived now in the house of Pharaoh for a number of years. So I want you to understand, between verses 10, between verses 9 and verses 10, there's a number of years. There's a high number of years, and then between verses 10 and 11, there's a span of time as well. So you have a time period where where Moses is living with his biological mother or biological parents and being, weaned and raised, we'll say, around 3 or 4 or what have you. But you've got to know there was some type of interaction between the house of Pharaoh, meaning Pharaoh's daughter, and Moses' family. So all of their needs were taken care of because they were taking care of him. So he's with his parents, and then he goes at a certain age, his biological mother presents him and gives him to the daughter of Pharaoh. So you understand that once he is given to the daughter of, to Pharaoh's daughter. Now, I'm not here to say he's 5, 6, 7. I don't know, secular history does not tell us how old he was. But I personally believe that while he was in the home of his biological parents, that he was there long enough to learn some things about the history, about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., to learn about the people of his origin, etc., so that when he was presented to or given to Pharaoh's daughter, that he had some type of connection, because we'll see that's not just a theory, that there has to be an element of truth in that because of his actions. So in verse number 11, he has been living in the house of the Pharaoh, and he understands Egyptian culture. He understands the Egyptian government per se. He understands all things Egyptian, and he has a limited knowledge of his cultural background or ethnic background, his true ethnic origin. Now, what's interesting to note is, and this is something you got to turn to secular history to believe or to discover, etc. Now, and that's my Black History note now, because evidently Moses looked totally different than the average Egyptian. Okay, history is now saying, openly admitting even, that during this time the Egyptians were black people or Nubian colored people. So when you think about that, it helps you to understand understanding the royals in we'll say the British royal family. Their children were not really raised by the parents. Okay, they have nannies. They have, back then they called them governesses and all that. So the parents have, for many years, those British royal parents, they are raising their children to a certain extent, but they have other people that are doing that, that are polishing them and fine-tuning them and educating them. They go to different schools or what have you, but there's somebody there that relieves the overall stress of parenting to someone else. That is why I guess it was a big deal with Princess Diana. She was like, look, I want to raise my own kids. I want to, take my own kids to school and pick them up and those things. So it lets it helps you to understand that just because they live in Buckingham Palace doesn't mean that they're all living in the same, they're in the same location, but they're in different areas. They're assigned different wings or different sides of the palace, or they have their own quarters. So it is possible for them to not interact on a daily basis, like physically seeing one another. Now, I use that modern day example to say this is how, more than likely, this is how it was based on secular history, how it was in the case of Pharaoh's daughter. Because trust and believe, if Pharaoh knew that you had pulled a Hebrew baby out of the water and he had made the command not to do so, you in essence are in disobedience to your parent, right? You're in disobedience, so you would end up suffering the consequences. So what I believe and what secular history believes is that she was able to do this under not just her protection of being who she was, but because she did not interact with her father or the Pharaoh on a regular basis. So she was able, and because she lived in a different area, she could have lived in, let's say, Thebes. Okay, let's make it relevant to today. If Tyler is the central location for the palace for Pharaoh, she could have lived in maybe Bullard. She could have lived in Lindale and interacted. And she had her own staff. She had her own guard. So you're going to be loyal ultimately to Pharaoh, but you have a tendency of being loyal to the people. In this case, to the person who you are responsible for. So when you understand that, then you understand that once Moses reached a certain age, he was then brought to the princess per se, and she was able to justify keeping him. Okay, but you understand there were some things that never settled well with the Pharaoh. So when you get to verse 11, it says, "And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren." Okay, which goes back to what we said earlier. There had been certain things that had been instilled in him that he had to know who he was. But when you really think about the story of Moses, and in keeping with our theme for this entire year, that theme of when God wants God uses not just life experiences to grow us, but when God wants to take us to the next level per se in him, or to trigger spiritual growth and spiritual direction and spiritual instruction and all those things, he does three unique things. Every individual from Genesis to Jude that was used by God, they went through the same process. They were physically relocated, they were separated, and they were isolated. So our theme for this year is, of course, growing. It's just simple, just growing, but understanding how he uses that, how growing is a process. It's not something that you just automatically wake up, I want to grow. I'm going to grow in God. Okay, first of all, when that happens, there's something spiritually, there's something that triggers within you spiritually, this feeling of discontent. I'm not satisfied. Sometimes people will, like we said on last week, they'll go places for many, many years and they realize, I'm just here. I'm not growing. I'm not progressing. I'm not moving forward spiritually. And what's happening is their comfort zone is being rattled because they've been complacent or comfortable for too long. And what the Lord wants to do is take them to that next level. He wants to advance them to the next level. So the first thing he starts to do is, as we've seen with every character, again, relocation, physically moving. I'm not saying you got to physically move to Dallas, Houston, Arlington, Austin, San Antonio. I'm not, New York. I'm not here to say that. But if that's what God has planned for you, then it is what it is. What I'm saying is we have to reach a point where we understand that God begins to rattle our comfort zones from a physical or natural standpoint. Whenever it's time for him to take us to the next level, whenever it's time for us to move, things around us appear to be not only coming against us, but it seems like chaos. All hell starts breaking loose. And if we're not careful, we'll just be like, oh, Lord, I bind the enemy. The devil is busy. Well, he's been busy from day one. He's got bigger fish to fry. Okay, than just you as a singular individual. His hands are full, but they're also tied. So when those things around us start happening, instead of us blaming, before we blame the enemy, what we need to start doing is looking introspectively, looking inward to say, okay, what's going on in my life spiritually first? Am I reading more? Am I praying more? Am I seeking to do God's will? Because if you're seeking to do God's will and you become comfortable, the first thing he starts to do is trouble the waters so that you'll see, wait a minute, I'm too comfortable. So he starts that process of relocation, and that leads to separation, isolation. And this is what I say now, it is not a new revelation. It's not a new theory. If you read the word of God, the only thing I'm sitting up here with is a Bible. You know, when you read the word of God and you start picking up on patterns, and from Genesis again to Jude, every character in this Bible that God used for his glory and for his honor, and everyone that in this Bible, every character who walked in the word and the will of the Lord, that's what he did. So you get to chapter 11, and Moses is a full-grown man. He's basically a man without a country, a man without an identity. Okay, he's a full-fledged Hebrew, all right, by ethnicity, but he has been raised as an Egyptian. So he has a different mentality. So he goes out from verses 11 to verse 12. He sees an Egyptian that is literally beating a Hebrew. Now, why would Moses have an issue with that? What problem was there in an Egyptian beating mercilessly a Hebrew if you are of the house of Pharaoh? That's just common nature. You know, why was there a problem? You know, why was there a situation? Now, I said this in the Tuesday Bible study when we talked about this. It's kind of like, Mr. Cameraman, please don't get upset, but it's kind of like slavery. Okay, which was one of the darkest periods in our country's history, all right? Now, with slavery in 2016, we really should be past the point of seeing color and racial differences. We really should be past the point of that. Why? Because slavery occurred hundreds of years ago. Now, when you think about Moses' situation paralleled with what we see today, you understand that there are certain tendencies and certain mentalities that have not been suppressed. All right. So when you look at it from that standpoint and using slavery, yes, it was horrible. It was despicable. It was a terrible thing. And what you do is what the Lord helps you to do is he helps you to not hold people accountable for things that were 400, 500, 600 years ago. All right. But he helps you to understand, I need to look at the merits of each individual. But if you see the same mentalities still taking place in 2016, then it helps you know there's still a problem. Because nobody is physically enslaved, okay? But people are still they're still being suppressed. So when Moses looks out and he sees, hey, this is wrong, to him, it wasn't necessarily about this Egyptian is beating up this Hebrew. It is first and foremost, stop beating that individual first. But then when you get to verse 12, you see he looked left and right. Why? Because society had made that acceptable. So going back to, again, this issue of slavery. Slavery was wrong, but it was the accepted mentality of that time. Now, there were individuals during that time that did not condone it, that did not agree with it. But you know what? It's kind of like what I challenged the students in the Tuesday class, which it's a multiracial class on Tuesday nights, but I challenged them to think outside the box. Mr. Cameron, I challenged them to say, okay, let's judge individuals of different ethnicities, not by the color of their skin, but by our personal interactions with them. But If you see that a mentality is wrong, if you see that a stereotype, a misconception, if you feel that it is wrong that's being exhibited by a particular race, don't just at a particular race or against a particular, don't you be the person, regardless of color, to stand up for what is right. Okay? Stand up for what is right. Don't just automatically assume, well, this is how that race, that ethnic group thinks. That individual is doing that because they like that. That's just how all of them are. No. So when you look at Moses, he was really halted between two opinions because he didn't know, okay, well, because he looked both ways. It was like, well, do I do it? Or what have you. So he looked at it from two different standpoints. First of all, he sees the humanity of it, and God convicts his heart for him to know this is wrong. But before he does something, he looks to see who's watching him. My $100,000 question is, if he knew somebody were watching him, would he have done it? You know, so when you get down to verse number 12, you know, evidently he felt like nobody was watching him, so he killed the Egyptian. All right. Then in verse number 13, it says, and he went out the second day. Behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? So the two Hebrews, the person he was trying to protect from a group that he had identified with, those were the ones that asked him the question, why did you kill that man? Why did you kill him? And then it said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Are you going to kill me? This is verse 14. Are you going to kill me as you kill the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. So what they were saying, they knew Moses was Hebrew. They knew his ethnic origin. But on that particular day, they were basically trying to put Moses in his place. Even though he did something that he thought was right, he did what, again, even though he thought he did something that was right, the people that he was trying to protect, basically that could end up turning into like a situation with blackmail. So he says that those two Egyptians, or those two Hebrews, they know about him killing an Egyptian. They were like, well, why did he kill him? And the reason they asked that question was because that was their normal way of life. You know, it was nothing for an Egyptian to kill a Hebrew. And again, sadly, we've got to get past that point where some mentalities and some actions are just the norm. We've got to get past that. It's not, it's when going to church is just a normal activity, just a regular activity. And notice I use the word normal and regular with the word activity. When church attendance becomes something that you just do because it's a activity, then you're doing it because it has become habit. And when it's a habit, all habits are not positive. So if you're just going to church just because it's the church your grandma went to, your daddy, your uncle, all your family's there, you like the music, you're just going because it's a habit, but you're not getting anything out of it, you're leaving the same way that you came, you run the risk of turning it into, again, just a normal activity. And you're not growing with it spiritually, and if you're not careful, it's going to become just a way of life for you. It's just going to be a habit. You're just going to go as an activity, and whatever happens there is going to be acceptable to you. And really, you're not going to think too much about it because it is what it is. So he says, when he says that, they say to him, or they remind him, this is just a way of living for us. So then Moses realizes, wait a minute, if they know, then everybody's going to know. And if everybody knows, then that means I'm about to run the risk of my own life being threatened. So then you get down to verse 15, where the news gets back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh then makes, hey, I'm gonna slay him, meaning I'm gonna kill him. How dare he kill an Egyptian over a slave? Okay, and then it says in verse 15, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now in verse 15, I want you to make a note. This Moses' life goes through 3 transitions early on. The first transition, he's transitioned from his mother's house into Pharaoh's house. Then he's transitioned from Pharaoh's house into the wilderness. So you have 2 transitions, and from the wilderness or Midian, he's transitioned back into an overall full-scale wilderness experience with the children of Israel. So when you think about it, this is where his life really begins to start. This is where he will utilize all that he's learned in the house of Pharaoh or the Egyptians, okay, the rulers or leaders' house. This is where he's all of that he's learned is gonna come into play. And it's also where the basic foundation for his belief as a Hebrew is going to now be put to use. Some of the things that he didn't, the rudimentary stuff that he learned as a child, God is about to really manifest and reveal who he is to Moses. Moses is on the verge of receiving a divine revelation of who God is, the equivalent to Abraham, the equivalent to Jacob. Now you have Moses. So when we talk about relocation, that now leads us with this character into separation. We now get to learn and begin to see how what God did for Moses, is on the verge for doing for Moses, is what he does in our own lives. Because look, from chapter 2, verses 1 through 15 or 14, Moses has lived a life of Riley. Okay, he's had some wonderful experience. He's living high on the hog. He has the best education, not having to worry about getting beat and kicked and all those things. But when we get to verse number 15, the way he lives his life is on the verge of being disrupted. It's his present position is going to be something totally different. His future is going to be totally different than where he finds himself now. His future is going to be more powerful than his past and more significant than his present. So that's another thing I want you to think about, going back to those particular verses. Verse number 15, when Pharaoh wanted to kill him, why did Pharaoh want to kill him that quick? And it's because evidently there were some things about his upbringing and his rescue and his saving that was not made apparent to Pharaoh. So when he killed the Egyptian, Pharaoh knew that by that time, Pharaoh knew who he was. He knew this man this is not your child right here. This is from this is a Hebrew. Okay. And it's also an indication that, again, he had to have looked totally different than just the regular average, house of Pharaoh per se. So you see where he flees for his life, and he flees to what the Bible calls the land of Midian. Now this is important because this is where his second life transition takes place, and that's something that we have to understand. We have to be able to differentiate between a life transition and a spiritual transition. Life transitions are like, we'll say they're more natural. You transition in life once you go through puberty. You're transitioning into adulthood. Once you turn 18 and you get out of high school and all those things associated with transitioning from high school to college, those are significant transitions. Now, I'm not trying to do away with or overlook or downplay elementary and middle school, but really high school, after you graduate, you really do start to transition into life. You start transitioning into life, after you go through puberty, because that's putting you in a position for adulthood. So you've got life transitions. You've got getting out of high school, transitioning out of college, transitioning into marriage, and transitioning into parenting and working. So you have some natural transitions that take place, and we cannot overlook those, because God uses those natural or those life transitions to draw us closer to Him spiritually. And sometimes we forget that. We forget that this is taking place because it's a natural life transition. We have a soon to be 21-year-old, and it's always, he doesn't live at home anymore, and I miss him being at home. And sometimes when he comes over, if he falls asleep, we don't wake him up, because we like that he's here. So we just go cover him up with the blanket. And sometimes if it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and he realizes, wait a minute, I'm sleeping on the couch. This is my house. No, this is my home, but it's not my house. He'll get up and he'll come in there and he'll say, I'm heading out. Well, and my husband is lurking behind the corner over here, because he's wanting to hear, I guess. But I admit, we don't wake him up. We let him sleep, because in our minds, we have not transitioned here mentally it has yet to set in that this is a grown man. He's an adult. We say that and we give him that respect, but in our minds, he's still our child. So that transition, that life transition, when we get upset about some of the decisions that he's making, we have to remind ourselves, well, you know what? He's 20 years old. We made those same mistakes. This is a learning curve for him. Now, what we have to, saying all that to say this, that when you understand the significance of life transitions, and you understand that God uses those events in our lives to draw us closer to Him spiritually, then we need to change our perception and our outlook on our life transitions. Sometimes when our children, when they move away, that's not a bad thing. That's a life transition. Are they prepared? They may be prepared. They may not be prepared. But that's when we have to, like the Bible says, cast all of our cares on Him, for He cares for us. That's when we have to admit, Lord, this is a life transition that I'm going through. This is a situation that I'm going through that I'm not understanding. It's hurtful to me. I'm angry. Whatever your situation is, I'm angry. I'm bitter. I don't know how to feel right now. I don't know what I should be doing. I feel lost. I feel helpless. I feel confused. I need you. That's when you really want to stop, because look at what's happening. He's drawing you closer using that situation. And trust and believe He's going to give you the clarity of thought, the clearness of thinking, instruction and direction, if you will humble yourself and admit you don't have all the answers. So here we see where Moses is what looks like a bad situation. Yeah, taking of somebody's life, that's definitely bad. It's horrendous. But you see how and I'm not condoning the murder, but God had to get him out of Egypt some kind of way. He could not have remained there and did what God had for him to do by remaining under suppression and under the authority of Pharaoh. So he escapes and he makes his way to a place called Midian. No, Moses didn't know where he was going, just like Abraham didn't know where he was going. Noah didn't know. We'll say Noah didn't know where he was going. Abraham didn't know where he was going. They were just basically wandering. They were under the full control and direction and leading of the Lord. And that's where I really need to say this. I know my minutes are, Mr. Cameron, how much time I got? Okay. I know what I say now is going to rub people the wrong way, so I'm just going to look at my gold and turquoise ring and Wonder Twin Power activate. Okay. We need to stop with all this. I'm being led and directed by the Lord. I'm just doing what the Lord would have for me to do. I'm just going in the direction he would have for me to go in. And you're not progressing. Okay? I know that sounds mean, but I'm not here to tell you that you're not following the leading and the direction of the Lord. I'm not here to say that. What I'm here to say is, when you find yourself not progressing, not advancing spiritually or naturally in life, and you say that you are basing your actions on the leading and the direction of the Lord, God is progressive. Salvation is it's aggressive. It advances. It's progressive. Not only is it's progressive, that triggers aggressive behavior, where there's a fire is lit under you, that you're like, look, I want to be the best that I can be spiritually first. I want to do everything that I can do for the Lord. I want to move mountains. I want to make it happen for the Lord. But then, and the Lord is going to help me so I can do these things for my family, professionally, career. We have more people in society, more religious people who have heard a bunch of church lingo, been hanging around churches and have heard church lingo, and they don't understand when you say I'm being led and directed by the Lord, that means you're gonna progress spiritually and naturally. So Moses is truly being led and directed by the Lord. He doesn't realize it. He doesn't realize it. But he's being ordered. Why did you go to Midian? How did you just happen to go to Midian? Well, I submit to you, when you understand secular history, the reason he fled to Midian was the process for him learning how to get them out of that area, how to get them out of Egypt and across the desert. So Moses, like Abraham, was basically developing a map. So when he fled to Midian, it just wasn't by chance. And that's what I want to, let's apply that to our lives. When situations arise in our lives and we don't know what to do, or I don't understand why this is happening, that's when I'm here to say, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Instead of trying to figure out why you're in that situation, okay, instead of focusing on, well, let me rephrase that, because sometimes you do have to stop and reflect, okay? So when you first stop and reflect and say, okay, before I give credit to the enemy, before I start wrestling with powers of darkness, let me see what's going on. When you reflect, was this a poor decision on my part? If it was a poor decision on my part, you can't blame the enemy for that. He's just capitalizing on your poor decision. So if you made a poor decision and you say, yes, you take accountability and ownership, then the second thing is to repent to the Lord and say, Lord, look, this is something that I created for myself. I need your help. I need guidance. If you help me to get through this, I promise I won't do it again. Then you go from there. But if you see that, hey, I've been doing everything right. This is okay. The enemy is using this situation. But before I give him credit, let me get over here and get on my knees and say, Lord, I thank you, because I feel that you're rattling my comfort zone. And because you're rattling my comfort zone, that means that I'm growing in you. And that means that you're taking me in a different direction. Lord, give me, again, clarity of thought. Lead me, guide me, direct me. Help me to see the situation as it is. Help me to remain faithful and steadfast to you. Because when you look at Moses, you're in Midian. You're starting the process for the map. You've gone from Egypt to Midian. You're going to go back to Egypt. If you've never been in the wilderness, how do you know how to lead? That'll preach right there, Mr. Cameron. If you've never been in the wilderness, how are you going to know how to lead people to the promised land? If you've never had a wilderness experience. There are some things, I'm going to be upfront with you, sir. I pray I never, ever have to lose a child. Our heart goes out to the different, people in our area in the world that have lost children prematurely, meaning irregardless of age. But there are some battles that I pray, Lord, I can't, you're going to have to help me with that. When our eldest, he was hospitalized back when they had that meningitis scare back in the 90s. He was hospitalized for 3 days. Now, he didn't have meningitis, but he had pneumonia, and they were watching him. And, and people were dying, left and right behind meningitis. And I remember sitting in the hospital in his room, and he was sleeping, had him on the breathing machine. Breathing machine. They had, trying to pump out the stuff from the lungs and all that, giving him breathing treatment. And I sat there and I said, Lord, if you take my child, I don't know what I'll do. I never said I didn't want to live, but I said, Lord, I don't know what I would do. So if this is something that you're going to do, prepare me for that now. Give me the mental strength now. Help me to understand what I need to know now. So when the doctors are coming in, they throwing out all these terms, I'm not up here just sitting here willy-nilly. And, of course, the Lord, that wasn't in God's plan. But that one lesson helped me to understand, and it taught me as an individual the importance of instilling Christian principles, Christian values, and making sure that child that you have been entrusted to here, that has been entrusted to your care while he or she is here, make sure you put that stuff in them, because there's going to come a point in time where either they're going to leave you or you're going to leave them. So when you look at Moses again, he's being led by the Lord. He doesn't realize it. So we need to, before we smack the Lord's name on some of this stuff that we're doing, we really need to make sure that it is of God. Because you know what? Like when Moses was in Egypt, people are watching. They're watching. So when you say you're being led and directed by the Lord, and the next thing you know, you don't went in a totally different direction, and there's no provocation or justification for what you've done, and you've spent and wasted a whole lot of money, a whole lot of time, a whole lot of energy, and you told people this was of the Lord. Wait a minute. Evidently it wasn't, because he didn't help you. Okay. Now, I'm not here to say, when I say he didn't help you, he's helping you, but that's not the direction that he wanted you to go into. So we need to really get a good understanding of that in our professional positions. I've been very blessed all my life, professional life, to have some amazing walk in some amazing positions. But you know what I realized? I was telling this to some friends of ours. I said, every job I've ever had, every job I've ever had that the Lord has really used me, I never applied for it. I said it was the one, let me see, there was the two jobs I had in my whole life that I just hated. Those were the ones that I took the initiative to apply for. And I say that because every day on my job, I go in, I'm like, look, I'm having a Joseph experience. I'm going to do something that not just adds value to the company, but it also will bring glory and honor to the Lord. So that when people say, how did you come up with that? Well, I'm going to be upfront with you. Everything I learned in church. And, I understand that God has given everybody a gift, talent, ability. I'm going to use it for his glory and for his honor. Those two positions that I hated, that I just literally just said, look, I'm done with this. I got to leave. One of them, I was young. I didn't even get him a notice, Mr. Cameraman. I went to lunch. I said, I ain't coming back. This not working for me, and I'm sure there are people that stop tripping. I know some of y'all out there did the same thing. But my point is, using that negative example of myself, my point is, when you before you start, if you're saying you're going to be led and directed by the Lord, that takes some discipline, and that takes some understanding and knowing who you are, and him explaining who you are and what he's placed in you, and you understanding the directives. Because again, if you're saying you're going to be led and directed by the Lord, and then you go in again different direction and there doesn't materialize, you know, who's going to get the credit for that? If you just stood and told us that the Lord told you to do that, Spirit of the Lord told me to do this, and Spirit of the Lord, and it don't work out. Who told you to do that? Because you know what? God is progressive. The Spirit is progressive. And that's something that we have to understand. So Moses is being led to the, he's in a position where he's not led to the wilderness. He's put in the wilderness to start the beginning of his transition. He's starting the first step in doing what God has called him to do. So from verses 17 all the way down to verses 20, he's in the he's in the wilderness. He meets, you know, his wife. He gets married, and he's in a comfortable position. And in our last minutes, we want to leave you with verses 21 through 22, where Moses accepts the situation that he's in at that moment. At that moment, he says, when he has that first child, he says, I've been a stranger in a strange land. So he accepts the fact in his mind that this is where he's going to be, that this is where he's going to end up. But you know what? God has a different plan. As we always say, if you have Christ, you're already a winner. If you have the Spirit of the living God, you can face any challenge life throws your way. Be sure to check out the website, check us out on YouTube, and you can live a victorious life. God bless you. I know who